to me, a big part of the value is just people knowing, hey, there's one guy in elected office at least who, if I have a thing I'm thinking about, I can just remember, hey, I should tune in at 7:45 p.m. for Transparency Tuesdays, and I can talk to the Iowa State Auditor and ask him a question about that. And I think that level of accessibility is honestly really important.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schopp, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the U.S. and arguably the world. Chief Influencer spotlights leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy environment. Social Driver teamed up with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and Communications Board to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Today, we are joined by Rob Sand, the 33rd State Auditor of Iowa. He was elected in 2018 after serving 7 years as Iowa's chief public corruption prosecutor in the Iowa Attorney General's office. There, he led the discovery and prosecution of the largest lottery rigging scheme in American history. It's a captivating story told in his book, The Winning Ticket, which I highly recommend. Rob is committed to transparency and accountability in government. Upon his election, he created a senior leadership team that included a Democrat, Independent, and Republican, with 2 of the 3 individuals having made campaign contributions to his opponent's campaign. His campaign slogan on yard signs and bumper stickers, Rob Sand finds bucks, is a nod to Rob being both a bow hunter and a corruption fighter who works tirelessly to save taxpayer dollars. Rob regularly hosts Transparency Tuesday via Facebook Live to keep his constituents informed about his work and discuss issues related to government accountability. He uses Transparency Tuesday to demystify government and to make it feel accessible to anyone interested. Rob was born and raised in Decorah, Iowa. He found a passion for public service in high school when he worked for 2 years to build a public skate park. He graduated from Brown University, where he was named a Harry S. Truman Scholar, returning to his home state to attend the University of Iowa Law School. Rob and his wife, Christine, live in Des Moines and have 2 sons. Rob, I've known you for a while, and I am so excited to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm honored to be here with you today. This is fun.
It is fun. And, we're really excited to kind of hear your point of view as a public official, because I think it's a world that a lot of people in different sectors are not familiar with. Our whole idea behind this is that some of the most effective leaders are more than chief executives or principals of their offices. They are chief influencers. And so I want to start by asking you, what is the impact that you want to see in the world, and who is it that you have to influence to achieve that impact?
That's a question that can be both deep and broad. One of the things that I've been thinking more than ever lately, I've always thought it, but it seems particularly relevant in a time of great change, is the idea that we should work with anyone to do good and work with no one to do bad. We're in a place politically where it seems like there's a lot of upheaval, where partisanship is deepening, and yet at the same time coalitions are changing a little bit, partially because of the deepening partisanship. And so you're finding people who said, oh, well, it used to be this and now I'm not so sure anymore. And so to me, the idea that you would work with anyone to do good and work with no one to do bad is really important, because we have to keep in mind that everybody out there is sort of going through this same tumultuous moment. Lots of people are looking for a place where they belong, or a sense of home in terms of people who share their values. But also most people are paying a little bit more attention than they have for a long time to determine whether or not their affiliations in the past still help them do that today. So if I was going to answer the question of, what do I want to do in the world, it's as much good as possible with anyone who will join with me to do it, and try to stop as much bad as possible, no matter who that's coming from. And I think the ability, look, I'm in elected office. I was elected the first time in 2018, just got reelected in 2022, the only Democrat in statewide or federal office currently in Iowa. But who I need to influence to do that, in the shortest answer is anyone I can. This isn't an isolated job. It's not a company. that simply can do its work and go forward in the world and trust that its impact is going to be had in its sphere. We have to, in politics, you have to win an election to have impact, to help set policy, to help set direction. And winning an election requires persuading your ordinary everyday citizen. Many of whom, again, I think right now are paying more attention than they have for a long time. And the more people you can persuade who are also in elected office, the better. So there's really no list, no end to the list of people that we need to add to the coalition to promote change. But by being willing to be out there and be communicating with people in a way that's a lot more open and a lot more human than I think most people expect from a public official, that really, I think, magnifies the ability to have that impact.
And that openness and that humanity definitely comes through with your style. I mean, you said it, but I want to make sure everybody knows you're the only statewide or federal office holder from the whole state of Iowa who's a Democrat right now.
Right.
So obviously, you're doing something right. You're going against the tide there in a way, and you're also the only Democrat elected to state auditor in the last 50 years. So, kind of wondering, like, what's your secret to even let Iowans know what the state auditor does, because most people probably don't have a clear picture of that.
Yeah.
And how do you bring that human touch to your interactions with millions of citizens across the state so that they support you and that you're elected and you're reelected?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to remember, sometimes people say this in a way that sounds condescending, but it's an important point to make, I think, particularly to people who are well educated about it. We live in a democratic republic, and we send people. The idea behind a democratic republic is that we send people to go figure this stuff out, right? Your average citizen in a democratic republic, they don't have to know. They don't have to personally have a 5-point plan to solve X problem or have a strong opinion about what we should be doing to solve Y problem. The whole idea here is you find someone who you think is going to make good decisions, and then you pay them a salary and send them to go figure it out, right? So to me, a big part of that is just being willing to explain to people, not in a way that presupposes that they should know the answer, right? Because no matter who it is that's coming to my house, right? If it's the guy who sweeps the chimney or the guy who handles the AC, or guy who put a radon system in, like, I don't know how to do what they do. They're good at what they do. I'm glad they're here doing what they do. I love to get explanations from them as to how it works. And I think most people like being let into the process of governance in the same way. And so to me, I think a big piece of the job is going around and, like you said, answering the question, what's the state auditor do? Well, it's a very ordinary question. Anthony, I actually get asked that question more than anything else. People who just say, oh, okay, what are you doing? Because they understand, right? They understand. I vote me as a citizen, I vote in the elections. I try to pay attention to what's going on so I'm informed to make a good decision when I vote. But the people that I'm sending are the ones that know much more about how this all works. And that's just like every other part of the economy. And so I like to answer those questions and kind of let people into the process of governance with a lot more transparency than I think they're accustomed to. And people appreciate it because, frankly, this is their business, right? It's their business that we are working on and we're doing. So when I travel around the state, my answers to people are typically, look, the easiest way to understand this is in Iowa, we're the taxpayer's watchdog. We sniff around and we bark, right? So we conduct financial audits, we do public corruption investigations, and we also do efficiency promotion. 3 things that are very important to making sure that once you've paid your taxes, they are getting used in a way that's conducive and helpful for you. And I answer those questions in person. I go to all 100 county seats in the state of Iowa every year. While there's 99 counties, which most people are familiar with, Lee County actually has 2 county seats. And so I go to both of them. Our efficiency program, which is called PI, we tour the state and give PI awards for that. And I'm very active on social media. My accounts, which you can find pretty much on any social media network at Rob Sand IA. I run them. I'm the one tweeting. I'm the one replying. And I try to be just more active and more transparent in terms of what's going on in governance and also just who I am in general.
I'd love to dive in more on that in terms of social media.
Sure.
Because one, we know so many leaders just try to delegate their social media to somebody on their team. And, it doesn't come through in the same level of authenticity. You've gone even beyond, I think, just the fact that you're managing those accounts. You have this Transparency Tuesday thing that you do on Facebook Live, and you use that to connect with your constituents each week. And sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. You answer people's questions, you tell them what's going on. You have tens of thousands of viewers, sometimes even much more than that, depending on the week. Can you talk about how that came about? Obviously, you see some value in it because you keep doing it. You're a really busy guy and you keep doing it, so it must be valuable. Because I think leaders who are in all different industries are going to find this really interesting. They might find it exciting and yet kind of scary and daunting to even think about doing that. And so tell us more.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are nervous by the idea of live anything. A lot of people in elected office. To me, if I'm live on something, it's like, well, I am live. Like, we're all live. Like, I'm a human being. I'm comfortable in my own skin. It's okay if I make a mistake. We all make mistakes. So Transparency Tuesdays, if anybody's on Facebook, you can tune in. Again, I'm at Rob Sand IA every Tuesday at 7:45 p.m. or very close to then if I am getting the kids home from basketball game. It's usually right about 7:45 p.m. on the nose. I start a live broadcast. I tell people what I did that week. Usually I highlight the things that are a little bit unusual. And I don't get into granular level details on each thing that I did. It's just a kind of a list of highlights. It could be 3 things that stuck out, or it could be 10 things that stuck out if it was an really interesting week. And maybe one of them is a moment to sort of shed a little light on what's happening in government for people and give them a little bit more detail. But then at the end, I also always, and I try to see, I'll have the comments on the screen as I'm talking. Sometimes I'll catch them while I'm talking, but I try to catch questions and comments at the end by scrolling through as much as I can. And so sometimes Transparency Tuesday is 3 minutes long. I just tell people what I did, and in the 3 minutes that I'm on there, nobody has added any questions, and I sign off. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. It could be that something controversial or there's a lot of big news going on, whether it's controversial or not. It could be that our office released a special report that people have a lot of questions about, for example, Medicaid. Or it just could be that we're getting into a topic that people are feeling chatty about. And I just try to answer their questions as best I can. It's not really that different from having a town hall in person, which is, again, what I do with all 100 county seats. But it's just an opportunity for people to tune in and ask a question of a statewide elected official. And Anthony, I really like the idea, by the way, because elected officials are so distant. They are so cloistered. And some of that is by design. I think people with a lot of staff and consultants around them try to keep their elected away from people because they don't want a mistake. I think some of it is inevitable. If you're representing a state in Washington, D.C., you are gone a lot because the way the system currently works requires you to be in Washington, right? But I don't think that distance is a good thing. I think it's important for people to have a sense of the ability to reach their government, to reach levers of whatever degree of power, and to actually have an interaction there, to have a check-in point. And so when you ask about, like what the impact is or what the value of it is, to me, a big part of the value is just people knowing, hey, there's one guy in elected office, at least, who anytime I want, I can, if I have a thing I'm thinking about, I can just remember, hey, I should tune in at 7:45 p.m. for Transparency Tuesdays, and I can talk to the Iowa State Auditor and ask him a question about that. And I think that level of accessibility is honestly really important. This is, the 3 million people in the state of Iowa here, 3.1 million. Those are my bosses. Those are people who pay taxes. They run the state, and our work in overseeing how those tax dollars are spent impacts their lives. So for me to be able to check in with them and for them to have a sense of the ability to check in, even if they don't use it a lot, I think that sense of the ability to do it is still important too.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say as a leader, oh, I have an open door policy, or oh, send this to my team. But the fact that you open that direct line and that it's
Yes.
accessible for folks. And I also wonder, is it important that it's consistent? Because you stressed, 7:45 Tuesday,
Yeah.
that consistency, an important element of the communication as well.
Yep. And actually I had a string of it was like this November, December. I don't remember what the time frame was, but remember it was cold. It might have been into January. I think I was sick. I think I was on a plane maybe for one of them, but it was a bunch of Tuesdays where at 7:45 I wasn't available. And I noticed that like numbers dipped after that. So I do think that consistency is important because, if it's not consistent, well, how do they know to tune in when you're available,
Right.
And I answer people if people send me messages on Facebook or tweet at me or send me DMs. I try to be helpful in answering those questions there too. It's not like you have to be there when I'm on, but I do think the sense of consistency is important for people because then they know like, oh no, this is a real thing. He does it every week.
Yeah. So I'm curious kind of on two sides of the equation here. On one, I'm wondering, do you think that doing this inspires or encourages could be public officials, could be local leaders? I mean, thousands of people are seeing, hey, Rob Sand is doing this. Are others doing this maybe? And then on the other side of it, I'm wondering, have you gotten any pushback from staff, or do you think others has anybody said to you, hey, Rob, I like the idea of doing this, but my team wouldn't let me do this. So I'm just kind of curious on both sides. Has this inspired others, but does this also stoke some fear and others trying to pull back and, protect? They want to make sure their boss doesn't do this because they're, like you said, sometimes those consultants get worried about mistakes.
Yeah. And sometimes it's elected officials. I have heard other elected officials say, well, you just, you really need to be distant and above the people. And, so being really present and available on social media just lets people see too much of you. And I couldn't disagree more. I don't subscribe to the idea that, elected officials should be distant or above people. They should be a part of them. And they should help people understand that they too have a role, that people like them can do things like this. Right. And being available helps people understand that. And yeah, I've gotten a number of people who have reached out to me to say, hey, like, I just wanted to tell you that the level of transparency you bring to your job has made me decide I'm gonna run for school board, and I'm gonna, after each meeting, like do a Facebook Live and tell people what it was we discussed and how I felt about it. I can think of at least one other elected official in the state of Iowa who does regular Facebook Lives, and look, the more people do this, the better, because it's also the kind of stuff where you read in the news what's happening sort of after it happened, but to have an opportunity to hear from lots of different sources who are involved about what's going on just is a way for people to get better informed.
Well, it sounds like to me, I mean, in terms of the history of your career and sort of, your values, you believe in the power of government to make people's lives better. And if folks don't understand government and they don't trust government, it really diminishes that opportunity. And so creating a mechanism that folks can have access to you can build that trust, and then government can even work better for the people, right?
Yes. Yes. Government power can be used for good or for bad. Right. And I get so frustrated with all the conversations that are focused on, well, it needs to move to the left or to the right, or it needs to be bigger, or it needs to be smaller. Can we just make it better? Like, there's so much space for a conversation around making government work better. And we haven't had that conversation really for decades. And because I've had people approach me too, Anthony, to say, well, it's really weird that you're a Democrat that talks about taxpayers' dollars and focus on efficiency in government. And I'm like, that's strange to me. Democrats should be talking more about this, because if you believe that government has a role in society, then you should want it to do a good job at what it needs to be doing, so that people will have a sense of trust, in a sense that it can't do everything, but it can do a decent job at the things that we need it to do, right? I remember a quote from Cory Booker. He said, rugged individualism is an important part of not just the American story, but a lot of what we've done in this country, but it didn't get us to the moon. Like, we have to have efforts where we work together. And this is the method for doing that. I like to talk about it in terms of living out our mission of self-governance. You go back to the Constitution and a bunch of crazy guys, in the 1700s who said, I don't think we need a king or a queen. I actually think we can figure this out on our own. And a lot of people looked at them and said, are you crazy? No way. Like, we need to have someone who has, the divine right to tell us what it is that we should do. And the idea that we could write down in a document what the rules were going to be, that we could separate powers so that they check each other, and that freedom and prosperity and liberty would flourish under a system like that, was revolutionary. But the work of living that out happens today, and it requires that people in government actually help people trust that that system can still work. We have to have people who say, yes, actually, I think if we have a legislative branch here and an executive branch here and a judicial branch here, that they can each do their jobs in a way that furthers our society. And that is the work of, in a way, of state auditors, but it also should be the work of anybody who thinks that we need to have that constitution, that there is a role for government in society.
It sounds like you're saying the founders would love knowing that a statewide elected official is connecting directly with constituents using technology they could have never envisioned, because that was the whole point of the Constitution and our form of government.
Yeah, I think some of them would like it more kind of a Jeffersonian ideal, of the people. Others were a little bit, they maybe preferred the sort of like, no, you should be above them attitude. But that's just my perspective is, don't be above, like I have this office, it's pretty fancy, but I would still like to go talk to people in every county every year and make sure they can meet me once a week on Facebook Live and ask me whatever they want. And that accessibility, no matter what your office, people don't care what your office looks like if you're willing to engage with them on a real, honest basis.
Well, and look, it's always a good reminder that if we had the same proportion of, Americans to members of Congress as the country used to, we'd have 100,000 members of Congress right now, right? So,
what?
Yeah, I mean, so built into our framework was having that accessibility. And of course, the population's a lot bigger now. And so you can't have it in that ratio, but
wow,
technology to get that.
Wow. I actually didn't know that. That is a mind-blowing figure. I think I need to go put that on social media, actually.
Yeah.
Is it like exactly 100,000? I'll go look it up.
Check it first, because I'm sure I'm a little off on it, but yes, this is what I just heard.
I think that's really interesting though. And there's different states do it different way. There are hundreds of, New Hampshire's a very small state, but there are hundreds and hundreds of people in their legislative body there.
Yeah.
Very, very low representational basis. And I think that's good too. It's one of the reasons that I'm a little unusual as a Democrat. And I think that problem solving and power in government should be pushed as low as it can go so that it's more accessible to people. Because if a US senator does something that hurts you, good luck finding them to tell them.
Right.
But if your city council, if your county supervisor, if your state representative does, much easier to find that person.
Yeah.
Right. State representative, a little complicated, but again, the lower you go, I think the closer people are to the people whose lives they are impacting with their decisions, the better decisions they're going to make. Again, I'm not saying more left or more right or more impactive or more restrictive, just better decisions.
Yeah. As I think about sort of I think of this as a breakthrough tactic, right? How you use Facebook Live to go directly to your constituents. And I know leaders who are in different industries are going to hear this and be inspired by it. Because, some of the best new ideas come from unexpected places, from people who are in different industries. And one of the things I'm wondering is, where have you found inspiration or ideas that you've brought to public service that are not because you saw another public servant doing them, but maybe you picked up on something that somebody in another profession has done?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is, and it doesn't exactly answer your question because it is still sort of internal to our work, but we have part of our PI program, that's our efficiency program, Public Innovations and Efficiencies. We collect good ideas for how to save money from local elected officials. And to your point, like this is the reason this comes to mind immediately is it goes exactly to your point that good ideas can come from anywhere. we have found city councils and county supervisors who have had brilliant ideas that have saved their counties or their cities big money. And what we do is we take those ideas when we hear about them, we put them into the program so that the whole rest of the state can hear about that within the next year, the next time they fill out the PI program questionnaire. And so we call these PI recipes, right? It's like a recipe for innovation and efficiency. And it's a really fun part of the program because it echoes just exactly the point you made, that like anybody can have a good idea, right? That eureka moment can strike any of us while we're walking the dog or, standing in the shower or whatever. Yeah. And it's just about a little bit about having that moment and then actually executing on it. And that to me, I think is a strong indicator too or very consistent with my approach, which is, I don't care whose idea it is. I care that it's a good idea. If there's a very conservative county that found a really good way to save money, like I don't care that I'm elevating someone who is a Republican. They have an idea. Their idea is good. We all should celebrate their good idea.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. When it comes down to even your personal approach, I love that, where all the ideas can come from anywhere. I guess I'm just wondering, when I think about your style and you're being willing to kind of embrace that overlap between your personal brand and your professional brand, and you're, posting on Facebook about, picking up Legos, and then you're talking about what's going on and as you visit different counties. I'm guessing that you didn't model yourself after most members of the United States Senate, right? That's not their communication style. Yeah. And so as you were advancing in your career and seeing other leaders, what resonated with you, and it's not just a generational thing, because there are other people who are public servants who are your age who are not doing what you're doing. So I'm just wondering, kind of, what did you see that inspired you and even encouraged you to think that was okay to do? Because it seems like it's kind of out of the norm, right, Rob?
Sure. No, you're right. So I do think that Iowa is a unique place where in politics, the retail sort of accessibility is valued higher than elsewhere. But one of the innovators on that was Chuck Grassley, U.S. Senator from Iowa. He's a Republican. He just got reelected, but he still goes to all 99 counties every single year, and he holds a town hall. There's a lot of elected officials who go to all 99 counties every year, but they don't really tell them they're coming, and they don't necessarily do a town hall. They visit a private business, and then they're in and out. And it's fair to give Grassley credit. It's also fair to say that he doesn't always have the best advance notice system for people who want to get in there. But the fact remains that his transparency, that his accessibility, at least in being there in person in an age before the internet existed, is a part of what made me think like that's a part of the job. You should go out there and, in a sense, be held accountable to your constituents, but in another sense, like, let them in, tell them about that decision, help them understand it. So certainly him, Harry Truman, or Truman Scholar, right? So he was always known as someone who was very accessible to people, very comfortable in his own skin among regular citizens, and that's important to me too. He's the last American president that we had without a college degree. The idea that anybody can do that job, I think, is important. And so I think the idea of being willing to engage with regular people as opposed to thinking that you're above them is important. And Truman's a piece of that for me too.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess with Grassley, you're right. I remember he had some funny tweets back in the day. Maybe he still does, about shooting a deer and
right
or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but some viral moments. So that's a good point.
Yeah, he's got a Twitter account that is very clearly almost always him. Yeah.
Yeah. When you think of different social media, obviously Facebook is something that you use and you're on multiple accounts. I mean, a lot of conversation about TikTok right now. Just kind of curious how you approach different types of social media, especially because some are so much more visual, right? And,
Yeah.
musical, and they don't lend themselves necessarily to providing the same type of updates. So
Yeah.
what kind of goes through your mind as you assess new and emerging platforms?
So the price of being the person who handles it and having the posts actually come from me is time. And the way that I have to modify that price to reduce that impact on my own life is that I've started using an intermediary app. I use Buffer. It's really cheap, but I go into Buffer. Buffer is linked to my Instagram, my Facebook, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, and I think that's it. And I technically have a TikTok account, but I haven't posted on it in months because I have it on a burner phone, and I hate carrying more stuff than I have to, and so I never bring it with me. I should be posting on it. That said, a lot of it to me is at this point, I need to put stuff out there in a way that's efficient and effective. And so even if I'm not optimizing for each unique social network, at least I'm putting the content out there.
Yeah.
And so my posts on Facebook, it helps if you do the colorful background and the bigger text for a post that's 15 words. Well, sometimes my posts are just going to be 15 words. And I realize it doesn't necessarily perform as well. And should I improve on that? Sure. But what I'm trying to do is have a little bit more regularity and a little bit more of a consistent presence as opposed to a rarer, more optimized presence. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. I don't know. If anybody's watching this and, wants to help me for free, they're welcome to do that.
Yeah.
But that's always the question for me, is just kind of like putting the content out there in a way that protects my time, helps me do all the other parts of my job and be a dad. And at the same time, honestly, like I love being able to post without getting into scrolling. It's anti-social media to a large degree. It's a cesspool. And I think the algorithms that they run have done a poor job of having an impact on society because they do favor things that elicit negative emotions. And so there's all this negativity that's swirling around us and all these incentives to mock people and attack them. And it's really dangerous. It's actually one of the reasons that's interesting. Every network has their pros and cons. One of the things I like about Twitter is the informality. I'm not, as you probably pick up, I'm not a very formal person. But one of the things I like about LinkedIn, although it feels a lot of times more like professional and networky, which is not my favorite, is every account has a name on it. Every account is the person that it says it is. So I like that because it makes the interactions, generally speaking, more positive.
And those longer posts actually perform really well on LinkedIn versus like your point on other platforms with the scrolling.
I've heard that. I gotta try those longer posts on LinkedIn. Yeah. I haven't gotten into them.
Okay, I have to go back to something that you said.
All right.
TikTok on a burner phone. So you think TikTok's important enough to use that you've explored this, but you have it on a burner. I'm sorry, we just have to unpack that, please.
Sure. Look, I want to be able to reach people, and that's a way to reach people. I'm also, understanding that it's not necessarily safe, and I don't want my personal information compromised. So an old iPhone, it's like, is it an 8? I'm not sure, but I'll shoot video on a newer iPhone, transfer it via like AirDrop or something to TikTok, and then post it using the phone that I use only for TikTok. It's pretty straightforward. And I do think that, look, every social network, not just TikTok, is a risk for your personal information. I understand and appreciate the sort of national security concerns about TikTok specifically, and that's why I have it on a burner phone. But people are going to make those decisions on their own. Their degree of concern about privacy is their own determination. And to me, it's just like, look, well, if I want to be careful about this phone was going to get tossed anyways. I didn't spend any money for it. It was just the old one. And so I'll just use it on there, and that's simple enough. Now, as it turns out, I don't really use TikTok because it's on my burner phone, but At some point, maybe I'll do that, or maybe I can get it integrated into Buffer. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's more friction there. But anyway, I think it's fascinating that you're thinking about, you don't want to just say, it'd be easy to say, just too much trouble, not going to do it. But you've actually been experimenting with it because right? Young people, that's a place to reach them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I want to shift gears for a second. We have to talk about your book. I have it right here, The Winning Ticket. It's a page turner. I mean, I have to say, I just thought this was such a great story. I'll let you tell folks maybe the highlight about this lottery rigging scheme you prosecuted. But the piece that I think is really relevant for the folks who are listening in today is you crafted a very deliberate message as you were working to convince the jury about the guilt of the defendant. You called it a 21st century inside job. And it just occurred to me, how important it is for leaders and for chief influencers to craft messages that are going to land with their people, their audiences, and why that's important. And that's something that you've done really well, whether it's from, Rob Sand finds bucks and getting that message off to the 21st century inside job. So can you just give us the sort of thumbnail about this amazing case and specifically that language? I really want to on that.
So that language, that phrase was specifically chosen to sort of address one of the weaknesses in my case at trial at that time. So big picture, this is the largest lottery rigging scheme in American history. It's an inside job that involved a couple of brothers from Texas, one of whom's a crooked lawman, and Bigfoot hunters. There's a fireworks salesman in it, an FBI agent who gets fooled, all these kinds of interesting cast of characters, as well as courtroom drama and just kind of like true crime investigative drama. And I appreciate the page turner comment. The Washington Independent Review of Books actually named it a favorite book of 2022, which sort of blew my mind. I was proud of having written it and got it out there. And yet to have an entity like that acknowledge it, to me was wonderful. But to zoom in, small picture to that trial and to that phase. At that point, when I was going to trial with the mastermind of the case, Eddie Tipton, we only knew of one lottery jackpot that we believed to have been rigged and didn't know about the others. We had really been pushed for time because he demanded his right for speedy trial, which in Iowa can be 90 days from indictment. So he had really pushed us for time, and we had time basically to focus on investigating the Iowa ticket, the Iowa purchase ticket in front of us, and not a national investigation. And we did not, let me put it this way. We didn't have precise, exact electronic evidence as to how it was that he got the random number generator computer, for which he wrote the code to generate random numbers, to spit out numbers that were going to be predictable. And so at that time, what we were able to put together is a very thorough case based on some direct evidence, but a lot of circumstantial evidence, right? And circumstantial evidence is kind of like what you would say, and the other way I describe it to a jury is coincidences are things that happen that are connected, but they're for random reasons. Circumstantial evidence, those things are actually all clues. And so instead of saying, wow, what a bizarre coincidence that you and I happened to walk into this restaurant at noon today on the same time, or it could be a clue that actually we're planning to get lunch together, right? And so if you have enough of these things, at a certain point, people's thinking transforms from these are coincidences into, no, these are clues and they all have one explanation. But the 21st century piece of it was an acknowledgement that we don't know how a lot of the stuff around us works, right? Technology, we have very basic understandings of it. And so I'm going to say some of the stuff to you now that I pointed out to the jury in my rebuttal closing argument, the last thing I said to them, because I knew that the closing argument from the defense counsel was going to be all about how we didn't have the evidence. We couldn't say exactly precisely what it was that Eddie Tipton did to rig this, and that we only had these theories. Well, my point was, look, we know that we can pull a small electronic device out of our pocket, type a message into it, and hit a send button, and it's going to get beamed into space and somehow beamed down, all in the exact same order only to the person that we sent it to, so that I know, my wife knows that I picked up milk on my way home from work. Like, that's mind blowing. Do we know how it works? No. But all the circumstantial evidence around us helps us understand that, yes, in fact, it does work, right? Because we have never encountered situations where my text message to you went to some other person, unless I typed in Anthony and it was Anthony Smith, right? Or something like that. But then we know why, and it was on our fault. It wasn't that it did it wrong. When we used to put CDs into a CD player, if I put in the Rolling Stones, I know it's not a miniature Mick Jagger and a miniature Keith Richards inside the speaker playing songs for me. I understand, just generally speaking, that CD has grooves in the bottom of it, and there's a laser in the machine that somehow reads those grooves and is able to make the sound of Mick Jagger's voice. Do I know precisely how that works? Heck no. But circumstantially, I understand that that is what happens. And so in a 21st century inside job, we can recognize that we know that someone on the inside committed a crime, even if we don't have a precise and exact understanding of how they used technology to do it, because technology is all around us. We don't have a perfect understanding of it, and yet we understand and accept that it works because we see it work every day. And that, to me, was a way to sort of encapsulate the idea in a way that was approachable and understandable for people, and make it really more of a feature of the case as an interesting part of it, as opposed to a weakness of it. And actually, one other thing I'll say on that, it's really interesting. It goes to this point. This is how this works. It used to be that DNA evidence, when DNA evidence was beginning to be used, you would have someone sit down, an expert on DNA, and testify for a day, explaining to the jury what DNA is, why it is that everybody's DNA is unique. And society has advanced. We understand, DNA is unique. And so when you do DNA evidence right now, sometimes you'll have a defendant who will just agree to let the evidence in. And even if they don't, your DNA expert testifies for 10 minutes, and that's it. Because we've advanced in our understanding of how things work. And I think this case was kind of an acknowledgement of that for the purposes of technology.
I highly recommend the book. And I have to say, I think there's such a lesson in what you just described for all leaders, because as we want to influence others and get them on board, whether it's a case like this, or, look, sometimes it's you're restructuring something in your organization, or you're changing your mission, or whoever, whatever it is, there's lots of different things that we need to get people on board with. As you do that, if you don't figure out the right message that's going to land, and sometimes, like what you're talking about, if you get too much in the weeds of it, that's not the right thing. People don't need to understand exactly how the CD player works to know that it works. And I even relate this back to your own messaging, right? I don't need to understand every single thing that the state auditor does to know that Rob Sand is finding bugs.
Yeah.
Rob Sand has this program, and he goes to all 100 county seats in the 99 counties to talk about this, and he gets ideas from the people at the local level who know best and figures out a way to do that. And it's kind of a theme, I think, that I see across how you've crafted messages and had success, whether it's one of the biggest cases ever in American history, or whether it's a really unprecedented election and re-election as state auditor. So it's something we can all take away.
Yeah. I think that's well put.
As we kind of wrap up, I just also want to mention on the winning ticket, being a big user of social media and LinkedIn professionally, it really jumped out to me, this detail, that one element of your case was that you were able to find that Eddie Tipton was connected on LinkedIn to a person who redeemed a lottery ticket, who was in another state. Didn't seem like they were connected, but you found that connection, and that showed you, wait a minute, this is more than a coincidence. And I just wonder, it made me think, do other investigators, do public officials know the full power of technology and social media, whether that's from an investigation or whether that's doing what you're doing with Transparency Tuesday to get the message out? And if they're not fully realizing it, Rob, what can we do to make sure that folks who are part of government are taking advantage of these tools the way that private companies are?
Yeah. So I think that people who work on investigations and law enforcement in particular do have a really good understanding of how powerful social media is. It's their job to go out there and make connections and find connections. And I do think they do a great job of doing that. We also, in the lottery case, had another lead that we had been able to put together through Facebook friends. I think Tommy tipped in Eddie's brother. His profile was public, and so we could look at all of his friends. And sure enough, he had a couple of friends with an unusual last name that matched the last name of some lottery winners in Oklahoma. And so we were able to, that was able to help us get on our way towards unearthing that rigged ticket as well. But I do think most folks in law enforcement are aware of the power. I think that the people in leadership positions and in elected office have a varying awareness of it. And I look, sometimes it's a question of different strengths and weaknesses. Some people feel weird in front of a camera. And so even though they're equally likable and equally affable and speak equally, intelligently, their social media presence just isn't quite the same. And so they go put their strengths somewhere else. I guess the bottom line to me is, well, to circle back, we want to have people who are trying to do good. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Sometimes it's reaching people through social media, and that's obviously a big part of the series here that you're doing with your podcast. You've got an amazing list of guests that you've got lined up for that. And so I'm happy to be here talking about that. But you know what? If there's someone else who doesn't have a great social media presence, but is in elected office and is doing great work, more power to them. Maybe they aren't the best at being accessible and letting people into the process, but we still want good people doing good things. And so if they're doing good work, then my hat's off to them.
Yeah, that's right. And then last, I just want to ask one more quick question before we wrap up today. We had a really a question that came in from one of the communications board's community members. All of us get pushback on ideas at work, right? Whether you're in a company or a public official. In your case, as a public official, this can be very visible to many people. It's on the news or it's shared on social media. And what they wanted to know was, how have you used criticism and pushback to your advantage to pursue your agenda?
Well, this might sound kind of weird, but I actually sort of hate politics. I think politics is incredibly stupid and frustrating compared to what it could and should be. And so much of it, one of the things I tell people that I miss about being in court from having been a prosecutor is, in court, if you lie, there's typically consequences for it. In politics, it's almost the opposite. It's like the lie helps the people who are willing to tell it get away with what they want. I actually, almost all of the attacks or the pushback on me have been false. Whether it's knowingly false and people are lying, or they just don't even understand. Like, I appreciate the opportunity to say, hey, look, politics. Hey, look, transparency, and one of my best performing Facebook videos recently was, I called it show and tell, and I'm going to do a lot more of them. Show and tell on a new statute that passed in Iowa, and all the reasons why the words on the page of the statute were very dangerous for taxpayers and were going to lead to a lack of oversight. But I was just pointing them to the words of the actual statute, opposed to like talking points repeated, regurgitated in a newspaper article that's basically just saying he said, she said, which is a lot of what media coverage is these days. And so I love the opportunity for, if I get criticism that isn't fair or isn't accurate, good, fun. It lets me illustrate how my expectations of many people in politics is the same as the public, which is that it's a lot of inaccuracy. And I'm sitting right here in front of them, pointing out those inaccuracies.
I love it. What a great answer to end on. Rob, we are so grateful that you took time to be with us today. We learned a lot, and I hope folks will check out the winning ticket. Where can people pay attention to follow you? You said it before, but I want to make sure we say it again if they want to see more from Rob Sand.
Yeah, sure. Most social media channels, I'm at Rob Sand IA.
Great. Thanks again for being with us today. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.